Have you been told you look like you've got it all together and you just want to laugh? Yeah, well, this episode's about that gap and what to do when that polished version of you in business starts to feel a little bit inauthentic. Hello, hello. Welcome to the place for offbeat health professionals who have bravely swapped their healthcare hats for non-clinical creative caps. I'm Caitlin, a psychologist turned copywriter, and this is Healers with Hustles. Hi, healers. So today I've got something a little bit different. I thought I would talk a bit about vulnerability in business today. And basically, I had the idea for this podcast episode because during the week, someone I was messaging with on, I think LinkedIn actually, and they said that they've been enjoying my content and that they said specifically that I look like I'm having lots of success, which it made me stop. And I had a little bit of an emotional reaction to that. Like it was a bit jarring. And it made me realize socials, because it's planned content and I write it and my branding looks quite schmick and how I put it together looks really schmick and it looks really polished and fun, professional, that kind of thing. And I don't really share the behind the scenes, the full story, right? Like it's definitely very curated, which social media obviously is. But yeah, to be honest, like last year, I was definitely in struggle town, like emotionally. I was living in a different place, like totally cut off from my friends, family, and there were so many changes happening at the time, like, and the environment was just not maybe conducive to my own thriving. And I really believe, I do believe, I know maybe a lot of people might not agree with this, but I really do think that the environment matters, makes an impact on how our well-being. And so, of course, yes, we're responsible for our own mental health, but I really do think if we're in environments where we're not supported, maybe where we're isolated, or maybe if we're like cut off culturally or spiritually, then that's going to have an impact. And yeah, that was me last year. And I didn't share it on social media because I was living it at the moment and it didn't really feel, I don't know, maybe that says something about me and my own hesitations about being vulnerable. But yes, going back to that comment, it made me really realize, well, maybe I'm actually not showing the human side of my business enough. I'm not really sharing the realities of what being in business is enough. And that led me to do a post on Instagram, which if you're curious enough, I can link it in the show notes. And it might be what I talk about in the post might be something that you've struggled with as well. It's basically about how things I struggle with being a healthcare professional, but then also working in a creative space or being a creative entrepreneur and the struggles that I have. So yes, I'll link that in the show notes. And so that's why I thought today maybe I'll talk a little bit about vulnerability in business and why it feels really scary and maybe even a bit risky, but how storytelling and being vulnerable is a thing that will be the quickest way to build trust and build connection with your audience, which of course is like ridiculously important in business and branding. Because of course, like a lot of us, and I'm mainly talking about myself, we might curate the out of what people see online. So we might share the wins, the testimonials, like the perfectly polished coffee shops with the laptops closing, things like that. But we don't necessarily show the behind the scenes of business. That might be like the late nights, the clients who don't pay their deposits, the clients who don't pay their invoices, that kind of thing. Maybe launches that don't flop, et cetera, et cetera. Which of course is super understandable, particularly if we're doing something that is so different to what other people are doing or so different to what our peers are doing, right? And so we're going against what's expected. Because yeah, when you're whether you're like challenging norms in your field or really doing something that's totally outside the box. So a lot of you, of course, might be doing that, right? As healthcare professionals going into creative fields, that's so different. It's so different. And so there's a lot more on the line emotionally as well. And of course, it's going to trigger all sorts of things for you. And so it makes sense to, as a defense against that, you want to have a curated image that you put out online because that it feels safe, right? But like I was saying, like what really creates that trust and connection is when we're real, or people throw around the word authentic, which yeah, authenticity is right. But I really think what people mean when they talk about authentic is being real. And real often means something that's a little bit messy. And so I couldn't talk about vulnerability without mentioning Brene Brown, who's done so much research on vulnerability and how that relates in business, but also just what vulnerability looks like, and particularly with the link with shame. And she really talks about like vulnerability being I think she puts it as the birthplace of trust. So, like, it's not being weak, it's not necessarily oversharing, but selective openness. And when we really do show up as human, we also give permission for others to feel safe with us as well. And so that might be like a client, a customer, or maybe even someone just scrolling past on your post. And feeling safe, I know that also sounds like psychobabble, safe space and all of that, but really there is research that shows like psychological safety is super important. And even teams perform better when they feel like they can be themselves without fear of judgment. And it's not too much of a stretch to say that that really relates also to your audience and how they feel around your brand. But of course, there might be that question of, well, how much do I share, right? Like, how do I just share everything? Like, is that maybe like trauma dumping? Like, what do I share? I also wanted to talk a bit about why being vulnerable works and in terms of connection. And really, it's the storytelling element, right? So when people get pulled into a story, they trust what's said more. And there's been research showing this, that people will even spend more money if there's a story attached to it. And I'm just thinking now, there's been so many times where I've been sucked into buying something because like the salesperson has told me this amazing story about like, who knows, the vineyard, or I'm thinking about wine, or I know my husband and I bought this ridiculous pen when we got married, basically because there was a story attached to this pen, which I won't go into, but it's a storytelling element. So when we talk about like facts and figures, that's cool. But really what gets people's guards down and gets them into their like emotional brain or their emotional selves is the story. And particularly if there's a story that they can see themselves in. And so actually, yeah, they'll pay attention, they'll listen, and they'll trust you as well. But what does that actually look like in your business? And so really it's like a permission slip that you don't need to be perfect, right? You can show up and talk about things that are happening in your business. And that might be like sharing a project that didn't go to plan and what you did about it. Maybe talking a little bit about how you felt after you hit send on your first pitch to a client, or a proposal to a client. Or it might even be the behind the scenes. So rather than tidying up and recording a reel in your perfectly spotless kitchen when really it's like quite messy, it might be film the mess, film the messy desk, take photos when you're when you're not wearing makeup or when you look a bit funny. I was actually talking to a client the other day and they said that they deliberately, because being real is part of their brand values and how they live that in their brand, is actually by posting photos where they don't look don't look particularly good. They look like a bit silly, or it's like a terrible photo of them. But that's how they live their brand value of being authentic and real. But like I was saying before, well, like how much do you share? Like where's the line? Do you, particularly like I was talking about myself and the emotional struggles that I went to, like how much do you share where it becomes a bit like, oh, that's your stuff. You should be maybe talking about that in therapy, not on Instagram. And I'm thinking about Brené Brown again, where she talks about like sharing from the scar, not the wound. You don't necessarily need to drag people through something you're still in the thick of. Well, you can if you want, of course. Sometimes it might be a good idea to have a little bit of space. So you can wait until you process it yourself, where you've made sense of it. And so you can share from that place instead. And so I'm curious if maybe there's an aspect of your business that you haven't shared, or maybe an aspect of what you're doing which feels a bit vulnerable to share, maybe because you think it might lead to you being less credible, or you being seen as not an expert, or you being seen as struggling. And I wonder if you also might want to think about ways in which you can maybe share in a way that feels safe to you as well. And how I did that in particular I was talking at the start about the Instagram post that I wrote. And I wrote it thinking about my ideal people and thinking, well, what would resonate with them? Like what would they go, yeah, that's me. I've been there, I've done that before. And rather than just sharing about like things that might not be related to what they've gone through. So really thinking about, okay, what will my client or my audience resonate with? What are they going through that I've also been going through, so I can have that shared connection between us. And I'd be really curious, like tell me about your experience in business as well. I want to hear about it. Thanks so much, and I'll chat to you in a fortnight's time. All right. That's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Healers with Hustles. If you've enjoyed today's episode, will you do me a tiny favor and subscribe to the show? Just tap the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform and you'll be the first to know as soon as a new episode drops. Thanks so much for listening. Okay, ta-ta for now.